Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about differential reinforcement. We're going to start with a quick overview of what is differential reinforcement, then an overview of each procedures, the 6 different types of differential reinforcement, and then we're going to wrap up with key takeaways. So let's get started with differential reinforcement and what it is. Differential reinforcement is when we reinforce desired behavior while we withhold reinforcement for problem behavior. So in other words, instead of punishing behavior, we're going to focus on teaching and strengthening the better behavior. So for example, in a classroom, if a kid is shouting out, you're going to reinforce them raising their hand rather than shouting out. So we can change behavior by reinforcing better choices, and that's what we're going to be doing when we're talking about differential reinforcement. Now, there's going to be different types of differential reinforcement. The first one is DRO, DRI, DRA, DRL, DRD, and DRP. And don't worry, we're going to break these down one by one so we're able to differentiate between the different ones and their goals and when to use each different procedure of differential reinforcement. These 6 different procedures are going to be used depending on what your goal is. So the top 3, DRO, DRI, and DRA, are going to be to eliminate a problem behavior, whereas DRL, DRD, and DRP are going to be to lower the occurrence of the behavior. So it's still going to be okay for the behavior to happen with DRL, DRD, and DRP. However, we need to just lower how often it's happening. And remember, we want to reinforce what we want to see more of. That's going to be the main goal. All right, let's get started with DRO, which is differential reinforcement of other behavior. And in this procedure, reinforcement is given when the problem behavior does not occur. So you want to eliminate it so it doesn't occur at all. And this is going to be based on time interval. So again, the goal is going to be to just eliminate the problem. So you're going to specify a time, and in the absence of the behavior, then reinforcement is going to be provided. An example for a DRO procedure is no calling out for 5 minutes. So the client or the student will have to not call out for that 5 minutes, and then they could earn a reward. Now, there are 3 different ways to measure the absence of behavior. The first one is interval DRO, momentarily DRO, and progressive DRO. We're going to break them down. The first one, interval DRO, reinforcement is given if the problem behavior does not occur during the entire interval. So, for example, if you set a interval for 5 minutes, they will have to go the 5 minutes without calling out. With momentary DRO, reinforcement is given if the problem behavior is absent at a specific moment in time. So, for example, a student is not calling out or out of seat at the bell. Like, there is a specific moment, not the entire time. And then for progressive DRO, the time interval is gradually increased as the individual is successful. So, for example, you start with 2 minutes and then you up it to 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, and 15 minutes, and so on and so forth. And remember, with DRO, it reinforces the absence of behavior, and you want the problem behavior to not occur at all. So it's going to be at 0 occurrence. Now, DRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, is going to reinforce a behavior that is physically incompatible with the problem behavior. So again, ultimately, the incompatible behavior physically prevents the problem behavior from happening. So in a school, a teacher saying catch a bubble makes it impossible for the kid to also talk. You can't talk and catch a bubble, which is going to be an example of DRI. The goal of DRI is to decrease problem behavior to zero. So you do not want the problem behavior occurring. So again, essentially with DRI, you're going to block a behavior from occurring by putting in place by reinforcing another behavior. So another example is if a kid kicks. If the child kicks and maybe now the intervention or the behavior that you reinforce is the child crossing their legs, well, kicking wouldn't occur at the same time as the child crossing their legs. So again, you're going to reinforce one behavior that's going to make it impossible for the problem behavior to occur. Now, moving on to DRA, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. This procedure is going to reinforce an appropriate alternative behavior that serves the same function. So, for example, instead of yelling to escape a task, the student asks for a break. So you're going to reinforce the appropriate behavior that's going to give them the same results. So the need is going to be the same, but the behavior is going to change from the problem behavior to an appropriate behavior. And again, like DRO and DRI, DRA is going to reduce the problem behavior to zero. You do not want the problem behavior to occur. You're going to reinforce the alternate behavior that's going to get them the same result. I love this one because it's very useful. The individual still gets what they want. However, it's going to be the appropriate behavior. So, for example, I'm a teacher, and if a kid is yelling out, I'm going to ignore that behavior, and I'm going to call on the student when they raise their hand. So I am reinforcing the positive behavior, which is going to be raising hand, rather than when they call out. And that's the inappropriate behavior that I want to reduce to zero. I don't want that happening at all. Now, switching gears to DRL, this procedure is going to be used when the behavior is okay, but it's just happening too much. So you want it lower. So DRL, which is differential reinforcement of low rates, the behavior is allowed, it's appropriate. However, you just want it a little bit at a lower rate. So the focus is, again, reducing how often it happens. The goal is to reduce the frequency of the behavior. For example, here, a student talks out in class about 20 times per hour. This is problematic because it's just too frequent. So your goal is going to be to reduce it to maybe 5 times per hour. You don't want to eliminate the behavior because you still want them to talk, just less frequent. So again, the main idea is just to reduce the amount of times the behavior is occurring. Now, there are 3 different ways to reinforce low rates of behavior. The first one is interval DRL, which reinforcement is given if the behavior occurs at or below a set number within a specific time frame. So, for example, no more than 5 call-outs within a 30-minute period. So there's going to be a number of occurrence within a set time. Then full session DRL is going to be when reinforcement is given if the behavior occurs at or below a set number for the entire session. So, for example, no more than 5 call-outs for the entire class. So the entire period. That is going to be full session DRL. Space responding is when reinforcement is given if enough time has passed between each occurrence of the behavior. So think of IRT when you think about space responding. You want a set amount of time to pass until they can get the reinforcement. So for example, here, a student must wait 2 minutes between each request for help. They can't just ask every minute. They have to wait now 2 minutes until they could ask for help again. Okay, now we have DRD, differential reinforcement of diminishing rates, and DRD is used to gradually reduce behavior over time. So reinforcement is given as the rate of the behavior decreases over time. The goal is a gradual reduction. So for example, if a student raises their hand 10 times on day 1, the next day you want it to decrease to 8 times and then 6 times. So as the days progress, you're going to be decreasing the amount of times the behavior occurs. You don't want to eliminate the behavior, you just want to lower it as the day progresses. With DRP, differential reinforcement of pace responding, reinforcement is going to occur at when the behavior is at a specific appropriate rate. So DRP focuses on the pace of behavior. We reinforce behavior when it happens at an appropriate rate. For example, a student eats their food too quickly. So we need to reinforce slow but steady pace. We don't want them to eat too fast. We don't want them to eat too slow. We just want it to be just right. So think of DRP and focus on the P as representing pace. You want to pace the behavior. Now we have the goals of differential reinforcement. So again, there's going to be different procedures depending on what your goal is. So if you want the behavior to be at a 0, we are going to either use DRO, DRI, or DRA. And then if you want to lower the frequency of how often the behavior is occurring, then we are going to use DRL, DRD, or DRP. The key takeaways is that these procedures are going to depend on what your goal is. Some procedures, are going to eliminate the behavior, whereas the others are just going to have it at an appropriate level. So this takes me towards the end of my presentation, and I have some questions. Number 1, when would you use DRO versus DRL? As you think about the answer, you want to focus on what is the goal, what is the behavior, what is the problem. If your goal is to eliminate the behavior, then you're going to go DRO. But if your goal is to lower it and not get rid of it, then it's going to be DRL. So for example, a student calling out, maybe you need to eliminate that behavior because it's distracting. Whereas a student talking to a peer, you might not want to eliminate that behavior because you do want them to have discussion with peers just at a lower rate and at an appropriate time. Question 2, which procedure eliminates behavior? Again, there is a few of them that eliminate behavior. The first one being DRO, then we have DRI, and DRA. All those 3 procedures are going to eliminate the behavior. Question 3, which one reduces the behavior? And for reducing behavior, we also have 3 different procedures. We have DRL, DRD, and DRP. So again, the key takeaways is reinforcement is super important. You want to always reinforce the behavior you want to see. You don't want to reinforce problem behavior because it's going to keep happening. Because of that, we need to make sure that we are reinforcing the appropriate behavior. Then our second bullet point here, match the procedure to the goal. You want to focus on what is the goal. Do you want to eliminate? Do you want to reduce? And then you want to match the procedure to that. And again, my last bullet point here, not all behavior should be eliminated. Student talking shouldn't be eliminated. It's awesome that a student is talking. You just want it to happen at an appropriate time and at an appropriate rate. And then lastly, my reflection questions here. Did the behavior need to be eliminated or reduced? This is always a question that you want to keep in the back of your mind. And why was the procedure the best choice? Before you finalize it, just think about it, reflect and think, okay, why am I choosing this procedure? And again, just to wrap up, we want to reinforce the appropriate behavior. Thank you so much.